Hi, I'm Julie Meyer. I'm the Chief Executive of Viva Investment Partners and the host of Entrepreneur Country Global, ECTV. I'm delighted to introduce Khasha Mekakin. Khasha, thank you for being with us today.
Welcome.
Khasha, we met a couple of years ago, actually, when you were looking at one of the investments that we have done at Viva Investment Partners. And you're based in Barcelona. You are a successful investor. You've had a good run of it. And we'd love to hear a little bit about your investment strategy, what you've done, how you've come to be here making the investments living in Europe. You're an American. Tell us a little bit about who Khasha is.
Well, so you asked a lot of things there. So one was investment strategy, and then and so I think everybody has their own recipe. So when it comes to doing due diligence, and we've talked shop with other investors and other people that do what we do, and kind of compare notes like, hey, how do you guys weigh and measure? Because everybody's got their own secret sauce, and some people will do a bad job, some people get by, and some people have a really high ERA. For my taste, the first thing that we look at is the team. So the cliche, I think I mentioned to you, for us is I'd rather have a great captain on an average boat than an average captain on a great boat. So we look at the team first. If the team is made up of individuals that are just winners, like these guys don't lose, great. That's already probably half the battle. Beyond that, we look at financial stability. You know, we might have our preference in terms of, where in the life cycle of the business we're comfortable coming in. Some people prefer to come in much earlier. Some people prefer to come in much later. We're okay with companies that are pre-profit, less okay with companies that are pre-revenue. So those are personal choices, and I think it depends on how many deals you're doing. If you're doing 100 deals a year, which is a lot, but I mean, if you're doing 50 deals a year, you might have a wider range and have some higher risk and so. But if you're doing, like we do, we probably look at 40 deals a year, but we only write 5. So we're going to be really, really selective. We have to say no 8, 9, 10 times for every one time we'll say yes.
Yep.
So.
Indeed. Now, you're American?
I am.
Based in Barcelona?
Yes.
How'd that happen?
That was a personal choice. So I'm very fortunate, and I try not to take it for granted that doing what I do, I have the freedom. I'm not chained to an office and a desk where I don't have the option. So I have the option to live in Seattle, which is lovely, highly recommend it, where I'm from. But I have the option to be anywhere. So my wife and I talked about it and thought it would be a good experience for the kids if we relocated for some amount of time. It's kind of indefinite, but I don't know if it'll be forever. But we didn't really put a timetable on it. But if we relocated, gave them kind of a multicultural upbringing, bit of an adventure for us as the adults in the equation too, obviously. But that was more of a personal choice. And then any business that has kind of come to the table through my being in Europe and people that I've met through living in Europe has just, like this relationship, has been, icing on the cake, to be honest. I didn't really come here to farm for business. But it's quite fortunately been fruitful in that endeavor too.
Now, if you could go back and tell the 18 or 21-year-old Khasha what you know now, would he believe what you've accomplished?
Good question.
Did you have that level of ambition? When you were a young man, did you say, you know what, I really want to be, an investor, and I'm going to do this, this, and this, because, you've made a string of investments. And
so I think the 18, 19, 20-year-old me, the 19, 20-year-old me that was the first thing that happened. We did the first business we launched out of the entrepreneurship program at the University of Washington in Seattle, where I went to school. So, and at that point, I think, 19-year-old me honestly probably had grander ambitions. My 19-year-old me would have would have been talking about how we're going to rule the world and it's going to be
fantastic. Yeah.
So I don't think he wouldn't be. I'm not saying I let him down, but his ambitions were grandiose.
Yeah.
But he'd probably be happy.
Excellent. Now we met kind of at some point in 2020, and we did one deal together, and we kept on talking, and I knew that you were working on a big company. It went very well for you last year and so forth. That was kind of in the lead generation, advertising. What was it that pulled you in about that business? I mean, specifically, there's a tough business, some big giants in that space. Why did you think that business was one that...
So a couple of reasons. I mean, you're right, that space, it's funny because that space is kind of under the radar. When you explain it to people, you always get this like, oh, I didn't even know that existed. Which, there's a lot of industries like that, but this is one of those. But within that industry, it's very competitive. But we were very fortunate in terms of how we entered that industry, in that there's a very successful firm in that space whose principal happens to be one of my best childhood friends. And so as we were having success as my business partner and I, and here's a friend of mine and his brother is a friend of mine as well. And we were kind of in parallel, kind of, being friends, but living our lives and finding success. He came to us and was like, hey, we could do these joint ventures where if I identify acquisitions within my space, you guys help capitalize these acquisitions, and then I'll swallow them and operate them under my existing infrastructure, and you just help capitalize the acquisitions. And when you have a really good relationship where communication is frictionless and trust is inherent, you're taking a lot of those like major issues right off the table. It actually becomes quite easy. Without those things, maybe we wouldn't have entered that space, to be fair. But he was a stud. He did a great job. We just did one deal after the next. By the time it was over, I think my business partner and I constituted like 20 to 22% of his entire firm's value, if I'm not mistaken. That's a ballpark guess. But it's a very lucrative space if you're good at it, and he is great at it. And so one caveat that we did have from the very beginning was when and if he decides to sell the whole shop, that's his call. We're happy to we're not going to jam him up. So he finally got into a position where he got a really lucrative offer to sell his entire company, and our 20 to 22% or whatever kind of went with it, and that was consummated here this last December of 21, and so it was a great run. You always hate to see the revenue stream dry up, but a successful liquidation event is the end game. So it's it's kind of sad but good.
What do you know today that even 5 years ago, pre-COVID, if you think about where you were in 2016, and if you had said today about anything about building businesses, investments, living in Europe, what do you know today that you didn't know 5 years ago?
5 years ago?
Yeah.
5 years ago, I think 5 years ago, the things that I've learned over the last 5 years have almost all to do with process of due diligence.
Right.
Because it was only since 2015, which is 7 years ago, that my business partner got out of the cycle of starting or buying companies, growing them and selling them, and then stepping into the role of angel investors that are choosing investments across a wider portfolio but not actively running the company anymore. So 5 years ago, I was only 2 years into these last 7 years, and the way I do due diligence today and the way we were doing it back then, we weren't doing a bad job. We were winning more than we're losing, but it's gotten much more refined. You're more confident in your judgment calls. You don't second guess yourself as much. You ask some questions you didn't used to ask. So as you would expect, right? You get enough hours in and you find sharpen the tools. So.
Indeed. Now, what's it like being an investor in Barcelona? What would you tell the audience of Entrepreneur Country is from around the world. It's about 325,000 people.
Wow.
People come to our investor summits in October and Kia in June, which I hope you will too, from 30, 40 nationalities. It's very global. No, it's true. It's predominantly European. But for people who don't know Barcelona and they don't know what it means to be a private investor in Barcelona, what would you say about the vibrancy of the community? Is it quite exceptional?
Yeah. I mean, we live in Barcelona, and it is lovely, lovely place to live. It's geographically blessed. You can be at the beach that day, and literally the next day you could be skiing in the mountains.
Wow.
2 hours, 2.5 hours away.
Wow. Sounds like Seattle a bit. Yeah.
It could be Seattle in July, maybe. But Seattle's climate is more like London than it is. So, but Barcelona, so it's a great place to live, very geographically blessed. Your access to Europe, because you're right up against, pretty close to the French border. Your access to all of Europe is really easy. So, so it's a great place to live from a personal level. I actually haven't done any business within Barcelona, to be honest. Any business that we've done has been in London and a little bit in Austria. So we haven't actually done business and indirectly in Barcelona. And I will say this, and this is hearsay, so take it as you will. It's not my personal private experience, but there are some investors that, you meet people, right? So there's some investors that I've met in Barcelona. They have not loved their experience at a business level in that city. I think the culture lends itself maybe to people being a little bit looser with some of their standards and their guidelines in terms of how they do things compared to. Certainly compared to the American culture, probably compared to the Swiss culture for sure. So the hearsay is not awesome in terms of investments in that arena, but life is great. People are lovely, Yeah.
Excellent. Now we've done 2 deals, both British companies. Mm-hmm. Yep. And that's not the American. Those aren't Delaware corporations, but it's Anglo and so forth. How do you feel about your experience so far with those 2 companies and kind of investing in companies that are going global from London and
Well, those deals that we've done together, one is fresher than the next, but the one that's got enough tenure behind it, whatever, they've been knocking it out of the park. They've been meeting and beating all their business plan milestones, and
they're incredibly impressive.
Again, it again starts with the team. Those those people don't lose.
Yeah.
And so it's been a great experience. I mean, obviously, the more of those we have, the more easily we'll have more of them. So, but yes, that's been a very positive experience.
In terms of it, people talk a lot about, the size of the European market opportunity, whether it's trying to imitate Silicon Valley and so forth. As you've become, how many years have you been in Europe now as a restaurant?
Almost 3.
Almost 3. Would you say that you feel that there's a uniquely different experience to build a business in Europe than in the United States, or do you think, well, it's all about first to scale, the same kind of things, or do you think that there's an even more interesting or more complex or?
So that's a really good question, but if I want to be really fair, I may not have the best input, the best answer for that, and I don't want to kind of pontificate, but because our only experience has been investing in it at a level where we're not even actively advising yet. With respect, other than this newest one in which now I'm going to be more actively involved with you guys.
We're delighted.
Which I'm excited about that too. But I haven't put enough days on the calendar to be able to answer your question. Essentially, and otherwise, other transactions we've done, we've been pretty removed from the actual operations. So I can't I can't give you any anecdotal evidence of how running the company or would have been different than when we were running companies in the U.S. But I know I would imagine if from what I understand the London companies, the British companies, are going to be pretty similar in terms of the way they move and the way that they're restricted, the way that what they're allowed to do, what they're not allowed to do, and it's pretty similar to the U.S. But that's only again hearsay. So.
Indeed. And what's your favorite company that you invested in?
Period, like across everything.
Yeah. Without thinking too much, there's got to be one that just pops
gun
out.
in my head. I gotta be honest with you. It's it's the bittersweet. So far, my favorite is the one we sold off. In December.
Yeah.
Because that one again, it was very. I mean, it was.
Can you mention the name? Can you say?
Well, it was a portfolio of companies, and I'd rather not, just because we were not the majority holder. But that one was just very unique. It was like a unicorn because it was profitable and cash flowing heavily, and then it finished with a nice lucrative liquidation event. It was basically like everything you would want. Yeah. So that's probably my favorite right now.
Excellent. They say that cash flow is king, and I think in Europe we have the Mittelstand. In every the German family owned businesses. Even up to like a billion of revenue, they call these Mittelstand companies, but all across not just Germany, and they're really based on cash flow. And I think as a venture capitalist in Europe, I remember when I was running the venture capital, I always kind of thought that there should be more connection between the enabling technologies that we were investing in out of our venture fund and the kind of traditional established businesses, and we should be trying harder to bridge. You've got, for example, in the automotive space, you've got all sorts of OEMs, you've got car rental companies who have this, and then you've got enabling technology companies which are providing the software and so forth. Sure. And it seems that we're getting more and more closer between the venture capital or the investor-backed startups and the kind of large companies that are already existing, the established businesses. How do you see that kind of relationship between the world that is, the status quo of how these, industries are developing and the stuff that you invest in over here, which is maybe the technology side of it? Yeah. Do you have any learnings from that?
If I understand your question correctly, I think my opinion on that is that I think that there are more fractured markets in Europe than there are in the US. Yeah. And so there is a lot more space in Europe for whether it's enabling technologies to come in and help the companies grow and leverage up, or it seems to be a lot more space for consolidation, a lot more room for consolidation in Europe. Yeah. There's room for consolidation in the US too, but it just seems like there's just like a million here and there's thousands there.
We see all the time, that there'll be the same proposition that will start in different parts of Europe, 4, 5, 6 different. They get funded by the local VC community and somebody should just hoover them up and to create a pan-European player. And that takes a lot of, because you got a guy or a woman with an ego driving it. And to get 4 or 5 founders to come together, it's tough stuff, right?
It can be, and you're crossing international lines. So I think there's a good reason for, so I gave you this observation that I have, but I think it's there for probably good reason, because it's a little bit more challenging because you're crossing international lines and you've got language issues and you have other regulations, whereas in the U.S., you might be crossing state lines, and there are some differences, but it's not the same as Belgium and Italy. No. So that's right. So.
And yet, Europe is 500 million people. If it could operate as a market, I mean, that's an incredible market to scale in. Yeah.
So there's a good reason for that, probably. But you're right. If somebody could come in and roll up, there's probably a lot more roll up opportunities in Europe. Yeah. And there are some in the US too. It's not like there's not, but it just seems like there's so much.
We at Viva, we're Swiss Investment Corporation. We really love Switzerland. We love it here. But we have, as I told you, we've set up our subsidiary in Greece, and that's now I think officially the fastest growing economy in Europe, which not a lot of people realize, and it's moved back into the positive territory with the credit bureaus or credit agencies. And it seems that Europe also has an opportunity to take advantage of different, you could say lower costs, but I think it's just higher growth, higher velocity parts of Europe. I would never claim that Switzerland is high velocity, but it's prestigious. And there's, 1/3 of the world's money, and they know where the other 2/3 are. Some people say 20 trillion. And so you have, it seems to me, an opportunity to leverage different parts. If you want to go to a place which is stable as, the mountains, come to Switzerland, and you put up with maybe a little bit more, not even bureaucracy, but process, because the bureaucracy, I think, here is effective. I have to admit that I've been amazed at how effective government is in Switzerland. Yeah. But it's, it's robust. You can't kick this and it falls over. But it'll never be, I don't think, fast growth or high velocity. And so that to me is what's kind of intrigued me all these years in Europe, is just how you could take advantage of different parts.
Yeah. There's in some communities I think if it's really well structured, then you don't find loose, low-hanging fruits as easily. Yeah. But you have the benefit of what all that great structure provides. And then in some other communities, maybe it's very unstructured. Like I'll use Spain as an example. Spain is like a little bit more like the Wild West. And so you have the potential to get really hurt, but there's also all kinds of opportunities that shouldn't be there. Like I can't believe that's there and nobody's grabbed it yet, But on the other hand, there is, 100 ways you can get burned that normally wouldn't be there either. Right. So there's this more Wild West. Whereas in Switzerland, I think maybe the U.S. is similar. It's like, yes, you can find opportunity, but you really gotta push hard. You gotta, you're not gonna find like just some crazy diamond laying around that nobody's looked at.
Yeah, indeed. How many investments have you done so far?
We started in 2015 doing, 3 to 5 deals a year. So, 30-ish.
Wow. Yeah. Wow. And when you've had a bad experience and so forth, have you more or less, do you just cut your losses, or how hard do you work, or do you take that view that spend time with the ones that are doing well, or do you try to maybe mentor, or there's bad, but then there's like, well, this is maybe a little bit more of an inexperienced person than I thought they were. I'm going to help them, or do you just say, I'm here to make money. I'm not here to be anybody's mentor.
So we've been fortunate in that of all of the deals we've done, 30-ish, 30-something, we've done 2 bad deals. Wow. So it's not been a lot of bad deals. Yeah. But those 2 deals, the way that we handled them were, and then we did have one where like Armageddon happened and then recovery had to take place. But it recovered and it went amazingly, but we had to weather the storm. But the 2 that just went bad, one of them, we were not close enough to the company. It's like it would be the same relationship as say we have with Vashi. I'm not able to actively get my hands on the levers and the buttons. If that, so it's like when they keeled over, we were a casualty, right? Yeah. Another one, unfortunately, we had to take some legal action. That depends on what the circumstances are and what tools are available to you. And then with that third one, Armageddon happened, and we worked with a partner firm that we together weathered the storm and did what everybody could do, given their respective roles to right the ship, and we righted the ship, and it went great. Indeed. So depending on the circumstances, this option may not be available in this context, right? So,
well, I think Vashi is a good example of that. It's almost mind-boggling how the culture of that firm and the energy and the drive, and they're killing it. Yeah. They're killing it.
I love those guys. Yeah.
I do too. I'm just always amazed at the high quality reporting to investors, right? Yeah. Anybody who just consistently, sharing information,
clean, professional.
Yeah. It's awesome, and that is why. And they had way back. I started working with them in April 2020. It was not fun at that time. And so, they've had their own share of things that they've had to power through, but they have powered through. And Vashi Dominguez is an incredible leader. And he is the caliber of entrepreneur that we look for and we put on stage at Mykonos every year. We call it the Mykonos decade because in so many respects, Greece was like the kicking. People kicked, people, it seemed like everybody was taking advantage of Greece, from Goldman Sachs to the Germans to you name it, the whole shebang was and maybe the Greeks were taking advantage of themselves, but somehow they've got their mojo back.
Yeah.
And I think, for somebody, the daughter of an entrepreneur who backs entrepreneurs, you just love it when you see it. I remember working with Nicholas Zenstrom at Skype and just seeing how, he went from literally having less than 15,000 euros to his name and just seeing, I remember they had this thing like the McDonald's hamburgers and how many people had signed up for Skype. And you just couldn't believe when it took off, how fast and explosive. And I think you never get over it when you're involved in a company that's just exploding. I've been involved in a couple and you're like, this is better than, never have I done drugs, but this has got to be better than drugs, right?
Yeah, when it goes well, it's like there's a lot of stress and anxiety and turbulence into getting it to go well, and I'd never want to disrespect that. But when it goes well, it's blissful.
It is blissful. It is blissful. Now, tell us more about, what do you see? Have you ever thought about setting up your own venture fund? Mike is a good, your business partner. You guys are really, you're tight. You're very
Mike
tight.
Mike is great. Mike and I have been together since we were 19 years old. And I always joke that he's my first wife. So we haven't formally, to be honest with you, but we have. There have been a number of transactions where we, what happened was, things were going well, and then people would tell us that they would like to get involved in a transaction if there's room. And so, we there was some capacity in one transaction, so we, invited somebody who had voiced they'd like to get involved. And imagine that from that, all the way to August of 2020, we did a deal where we brought in 34 outside people, but it was all like kind of organic,
right.
And just grew kind of by reputation and by whatnot. But it was more like a loose coalition of angel investors, not so much like we set up a venture fund or something. I wouldn't be opposed to doing that. I just I think we just never really looked at that as like, hey, we'd like to go do that. But if we stopped and thought about it and decided that's what we'd like to do, maybe we go chase that down.
How's your Spanish?
My Spanish is coming along. I'm functional. I would never tell a Spaniard that I'm fluent. That would be offensive. But I'm functional. But I arrived with a good measure of Spanish. I studied it in school. We did one of our companies was in the travel business way back in the day, so I would do business with hotels and restaurants in Spain for months at a time. So I got to use it in practice. So I came in with kind of a foundation and then built on that. So I'm pretty functional, making mistakes, but they know I'm there. But my Spanish is Latin American Spanish, so it's different. They can tell.
No, I was, and I don't mean to be flippant about COVID, but we kind of had a good COVID, if it's not too flippant to say, and it probably is too flippant to say, but it moved things forward. The businesses that really needed that driver to take off, it drove the digital acceleration, right? So we have a couple of businesses in our portfolio. And even now, we're investing in a company which is doing drones and security and autonomous data collection. And unfortunately, because of the war, people want to invest in things that have to do with security and so forth. How have things like COVID or, God forbid, this horrible war that we're in, does it change? Are you changing your investment thesis and strategy by saying, now I'm going to do more in cyber, now I'm going to do more in biotech, because how close is this relationship between what happens in the world and what you might talk about with your wife or Mike or your life with what you invest in? Do you take a lot from life in terms of what you invest in, or are these different spheres?
No, that's a really good question. So I'm thinking about that, and I'm thinking there's the longer you're around, right?
Yeah.
You kind of collect these data points, like the 2008-2009 real estate crash, right?
Yeah.
So that experience teaches you something. You collect something from that, and then that'll stick with you when you make decisions in the future. You might be like, well, what if something like that happened? How would this hold up?
Yeah.
So this becomes another one of those data points where you might look at something and it maybe hasn't changed your entire investment approach, top to bottom. It hasn't turned it upside down, but it becomes another data point where you're like, well, if another thing like that happens, how will this hold up? And so it's relevant. I don't think it's turned everything on its head for us, but it becomes a relevant lesson, a relevant litmus test that you want to kind of run in your head to see, like, hey, a company like this, if another pandemic hits, they're disappearing first. So we should be careful. Whereas I wouldn't have even thought of a pandemic in 2018, the thought of a pandemic wasn't one of my litmus tests in my head, right?
Yeah.
So you do it matters, but there's a bunch of these, and that the longer you're around, you collect, right? So it's information.
When we were talking about you joining the company that you've recently invested in, I'm so excited to be working with you. You were very thoughtful. I really appreciated the approach. You said your process, and it seemed a little bit that you liked the idea of going into something new. That was part of it. Learning. And kind of that mountain to climb to say, okay, this is a whole new area. Mobility, and I'm gonna figure out where the tug in the market is. Is that fair?
Yeah, it is. That's been the most. That's been the most fun thing about the last 7 years. What for us has been every time we're looking at a deal, because we don't. When I meet somebody, they're like, "What do you do?" And I kind of explain. They always wonder what sector, and I'm like, literally anywhere. We've been in everything from biotech to advertising to retail to logistics to cannabis to diamonds, like right. So but every time that we're going through the process of looking at a deal, it's like going to school. The due diligence process is educational. I now know things about industries that I've never actually been near because of the process of doing that due diligence. So that's fun, and I like that. In this new context where I'm now going to come on board and actively try to functionally also help the company grow, it's fun to learn, but I also want, until I learn enough that I am able to meaningfully contribute, my going concern is just, hey, you got to ramp up so you can do damage. You can't just hang around and pretend you were there, So that's.
What I loved about the discussions is that for me, at the end of the day, I so remember being at INSEAD in 1997, and everybody was talking about, I'm a management consultant, I do strategy, and I'm an investment banker, I'm this and this and so forth. And I said I'm a salesperson, and there was like a deep hush, oh my God, she's just admitted that she's a salesperson, And actually, I think I was doing marketing for technology firms and so forth. But at the end of the day, for me, the idea of being a salesperson is a positive thing. You're convincing people to buy what you sell, and that is the core of business, right? If I'm selling flowers, and I don't, it doesn't bother me if somebody says I don't like your pink flowers, because I'm trying to understand exactly what they don't like about that. And so I loved the fact that you just got, there's a sales challenge here, and this is where I could throw more money at the problem, but that's not the point. The point is to help with the sales challenge.
It's true, and this is something Michael and I have said from, I think, 20 years ago. Sales makes money, everybody else spends it.
Yeah.
The entire company has to exist to support
sales. Yes. Yes.
And people forget that very easily. God. When you say that out loud, everybody kind of
recoils.
No, well, not so much that, as much as like you say it because it's true and it makes sense. Everybody's like, oh yeah, they're really easy to agree, because they're not going to disagree that sales makes money and everybody else spends it. But if you don't put a light on that sentiment,
Yeah.
people forget that's the lifeblood of the company.
Yeah.
And there is such a thing as bad sales, but this like 80s used car sales concept is not all of sales. I mean, there's a guy I met a long time ago, 2002-ish, and really kind of an unpolished character. I hope he doesn't see this, but I'm not gonna name him. Kind of an unpolished character, but definitely good at what he did.
Yeah.
And he said something that, it's just one of those phrases that sticks in your head. He was like, sales is not something you do to someone, it's something you do for someone. And I know that can sound a little corny, but if your product is valid, then you function as a communication platform in order, and if they then discover that this is what they want, because you communicated well, then they're welcome.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Then everybody wins, right?
Yeah.
If these suck and I convince them that they're awesome, then I've done harm, and that's not what we're talking about.
No.
Right.
No.
But if this is great and I help them understand that this is great, then everybody wins. You're welcome.
Yeah, absolutely. I think of it as an opportunity. When you're bringing people and helping people match, what things that they might want to consider investing in. I think, I've discovered something, I've discovered this company or this entrepreneur and what they know really well. And you're sharing almost as if you would with a friend. Look at this. This is really interesting. What do you think about the way they're solving that problem? And that's the way I think of what I do is there's so many problems in the world and entrepreneurs are the people who solve them. And, let's help those people who are solving the problems. Let's help them with everything that we got, right? Yeah. Move them along and be part of that journey because it just seems like it's the most important thing I could do with my life. Yeah.
Yeah, it's fun. I mean, in the deals where we've been invited to give input and or they've thought that we could contribute with advice and actually get our hands on a little bit. We've appreciated that. We've tried to make sure that we only open our mouths when we have something useful to say. But as an investor, sometimes you're nowhere near. They're not necessarily looking for your input.
Now, there's people that will be watching this and they'll be very interested to contact you. What kind of companies would you say you're looking for? I know you said everything and you look at anything and so forth, but are there a couple of areas that you think some of these problems are interesting to solve? Or
no, we're really, to be honest, we're fairly agnostic in terms of we don't have an industry focus.
Okay.
And if you look at the portfolio, it's wild. How it's everywhere. So we're very agnostic from that standpoint. I would say that, we tend not to look at companies who are just a business plan without even a finished product and $1 of revenue. Now,
right.
we have invested in companies that were pre-revenue. It's happened, but it's not our favorite profile. Other things would have to be overwhelmingly convincing to make up for that, because that would be a detriment for us in terms of the profile of the companies we try to target. Pre-profit we think is okay by us, but pre-revenue is a big hurdle to overcome. But again, it doesn't mean, I'll admit we've done it, and it's just going to be a rougher scrutiny.
Yes, well, I mean, running a seed venture capital firm, that was interesting. That there's probably
you
not
did
enough.
That.
I definitely would never do it again. I always say I used to love entrepreneurs, and then I ran a seed venture capital firm, and I think every interesting discussion about that we need to product. Well, we have got product market fit. Julie, no, that's not product market fit. So I had. Discussions, otherwise known as arguments, with people about things that I never thought that I would, because in that early stage, you're dealing with people's fragile egos. You're dealing with their kind of fantasy of the problem that they want to solve. And it's true that every once in a while you get a Vashi and you get these amazing situations. And I've been fortunate to work with unbelievable entrepreneurs in my career. But you deal with some delusional people, and when it doesn't go the way, not everybody has the wherewithal to say, okay, right, maybe I'm doing something which is it's smaller than what I thought. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of coaching, and so we tend to do pre-IPO deals these days.
Because I'm not surprised to hear you say that, because in that universe where you were swimming, it's So statistically, most will fail, right?
Yeah.
But you're looking at all of them before that's happened, and so but the reasons like there's, a lot of them, they fall in love with their own product,
Yeah.
and they forget about everything else that's required to run a business.
Yeah.
They're like, if the product is amazing,
Yeah.
we're
Don't
immediately
you
going to
see
be
that? Yeah.
successful. I'm like, the world is littered with stories of good products and bad businesses that died behind them. You're not the first.
Indeed. The other thing I was going to ask you about your relationship with Mike. I've been fortunate to have some great business partners, and I have some really good ones right now. What happens when you and Mike disagree about something, and you say, "Let's go left," and he says, "Let's go right," and you say, "Well, what's this going to mean?" Yeah,
we're older and wiser now. We used to fight,
Did
not
you?
like fists, but there's been. We, there's been these screaming matches. There's been it's gotten bloody, but he's like a brother to me. So it's like fighting with your brother, right? But when we were younger, they were much more emotionally charged. Tempers could run, but in the end, you have to agree because you're in this ship together. Like,
right.
what am I? I'm not going to sink the boat to spite you. I'm on the boat.
Right.
So, but then now, we're older, we're wiser. Like, maybe we get a little frustrated, but like we have a much calmer dialogue, and we have a better. The more time you spend with somebody, you kind of get this barometer where you can gauge whether. If you don't agree, does it mean more to him or does it mean more to me?
Yeah.
And so if I get the sense that it means more to him than me, but we don't agree, I'm like, cool, we'll do it your way. And if he gets the sense that, okay, we don't agree, but this is really important to you, he'll know to, and you shouldn't abuse that. Like always pretend like it's really meaningful. So it's delicate, but that's how you have a good partnership.
Interesting. Well, we'd love to welcome you to Entrepreneur Country TV again, of course, but to Kianaissance and to FT Mykonos, where you can meet more of our entrepreneurs.
Got it on the calendar, yeah.
And that's the FT Mykonos is in its 13th year in Mykonos, of course, the first week of October, and Kianaissance, which is our platform in Kia, Greece, the first week of June. And I think there's direct flights going from Athens to Barcelona at that time. I think in the midsummer, I think Europe steps up to it and does the flights and so forth. Listen, thank you for sharing your insights and your thoughts. And we're so pleased to have you in our portfolio of investors. We think of Viva Investment Partners as a business family, people that we very carefully let people in as well, because it's always you want to make sure that when you bring people into your business family, that they don't fall out, that they are happy, that it all works out and so forth. So we appreciate you sharing your thoughts with Entrepreneur Country TV today. Thank you so much, Khasha.
This was fun. Thank you.
Thank you.